Now that our guests are here, I will, oh, recording, got it. Welcome you all to the League of Women Voters Minneapolis Educational Forum we call the Civic Buzz. The topic for February is homelessness. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in all levels of government. Our goal for the Buzz is that everyone leaves the discussion with a broader understanding of important issues and policies. At the League, we recognize that diversity makes our organization and our democracy stronger. Inclusion of people with differing perspectives, opinions, and life experiences helps us to understand issues more fully and advocate more effectively. Equity doesn't just mean listening to and representing all voices. It also means lifting up the voices of those who have long been ignored or even forcibly silenced in our society and public discourse. Diversity, equity, inclusion are not just buzzwords. They're principles that are central to the League's current and future success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers to create a more perfect democracy. We'll begin tonight with a presentation from our speakers, and afterward there will be time to take questions from the audience. As I said before, if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, we will ask them for you. You can also use the raise hand button or just raise your hand in the camera and we can call on you that way as well. So our speakers tonight are Hennepin County Commissioner Marion Greene and Area Manager of Hennepin County's Office to End Homelessness, Danielle Werder. Am I saying that right? Is it Werder? Okay. Commissioner Greene is in her third term, representing District 3, which includes much of downtown and southwest Minneapolis and all of St. Louis Park. Last year, she spearheaded Hennepin County's successful advocacy for a 3/4-cent metro sales tax for transit investment and a 1/4-cent sales tax for affordable housing investment. During the pandemic, she championed the Hotels to Homes initiative and a pilot of several single-room occupancy or SRO buildings in District 3 with great success. SROs combine private rooms with shared kitchens and communal spaces, and more SRO buildings are now in the works. Danielle Werder serves as area manager of the Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness. Supporting the county's homeless crisis response system, Danielle manages a team of 65+ staff who specialize in system planning, housing-focused case management, housing-focused street outreach navigation, and swiftly connecting people experiencing homelessness with homeless dedicated housing units. In recent years, Danielle and her team have focused on creating a trauma-informed, person-centered, and housing-focused system that is equitable and easy to access. So, without further ado, take it away, our speakers.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction, Lisa, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. I'm Marion Greene. I'm the Hennepin County Commissioner, and I serve southwest Minneapolis into downtown Minneapolis, all of St. Louis Park. But as I hope you know from your engagement already, Hennepin County Commissioners really work to serve the whole region. It's my delight to be here with Danielle Werder. She's one of the amazing staff that we have at Hennepin County, and I feel as though in my remarks this evening, you'll get the sense that it's sort of my job to get out of the way and really let people like Danielle do the amazing work that they are trained and want to do with their skills and understanding of the issues, their desire to solve problems. Really, as I tell our county administrator, I feel so honored every day to be sort of a front woman for this incredible organization doing important work. And I'll add a learning organization. As Danielle will share in her presentation, there's been a lot of change in this space in particular in the last handful of years, and it's because the county is able to sort of take in new information and do things a little differently when that really makes sense. And so I want to give credit for that as well. Before I sort of get out of the way and let Danielle really share here, I'll just say that in the presentation that she's going to give, the sort of original, at the beginning, she'll be talking about sort of level setting, making sure that there's a shared understanding across everybody in this presentation about what in a way we're talking about, what are we focusing on, and then what are changes that what outcomes have come out of those changes from the recent investments that I'm alluding to. And then we'll have times for questions at the end, and feel free to ask policy questions and sort of push me if there are things that you see happening in the public that you'd really like to influence the board on, and ask us about the direction that we're trying to provide, because I think it's a really dynamic space, especially now. As I mentioned, there's a lot of change happening in this space, and one of the changes that I do want to highlight is the involvement and input of people affected. So in this space, it's people who themselves are experiencing or have experienced homelessness. That's a signature change, I think, that's happening across our work and the county's work in many, many ways. And our work to serve people experiencing homelessness is not different. We are really trying very hard to listen and learn to the people who our system is working to serve, because sometimes we find that what we think somebody needs is not what they need. And we're really working to hear that. And Danielle will talk more about that, but I think it's a really interesting and dynamic element of the county's work, and certainly the county's work in this space. So having shared those few remarks, I want to hand it over to Danielle, and just thank you so much for being here and for your interest in this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Greene. So I do have a PowerPoint, and I'll share my screen in just a second, but I echo it's informal, so please interrupt and ask questions. This is just kind of highlighting the system as a whole, but we really want to talk about what people are interested in, what people have questions in. So I can kind of go quickly over some areas and really dig into others. So I just wanted to say that before I start. So, I should also introduce myself. Danielle Werder with Hennepin County Office of Homelessness. And when I first started in the Office of Homelessness about 8 or 9 years ago, there was only 8 people in the office altogether. And so there's been a lot of growth and a lot of innovation and a lot of expertise brought on in the past couple of years. So it's been really exciting to be a part of. So I will quickly share my screen and go from there. All right. Are people able to see the PDF?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So everything Commissioner Greene said, kind of level set, kind of share all of the changes that have happened in the last few years, and of course have time for questions, but feel free to interrupt throughout. So the first thing that's really important to highlight here is that things are not how they always have been. There's been a lot of changes since 2020. The pandemic brought a lot of hardship, but it also, in this particular sector, brought a lot of investment and attention, which has been really great. And so we have been able to, there's just been so much new staff, new funding, lots of turnover. And so one thing I really wanted to call out before we even started is pre-pandemic, the county was spending about $10 million in the entire homeless response system. That's families, singles, youth. And now we're closer to over $40 million and wanting to maintain those investments as we're seeing the impacts. So as Commissioner Greene mentioned, people with lived experience being part of our work, policy, hiring, funding decisions has been, well, it's always been needed, but in the past couple of years, it's been implemented in a really concrete way. So we have a lived experience advisory group here within the county who advises on all of these pieces. We also work with outside advocacy groups, the Street Voices of Change. We work closely. My team is there every single month. I go there quarterly. And we also work with the Youth Action Board, which is a group of young people who are also great advocates. And so funding, all of these pieces, I think we're doing better now because people with lived experience are so firmly at the table and advising not just in like in a tokenizing way, but like in a very practical, like boots hit the ground, actually impacting our policy decisions. And I should say our hiring has gotten better. I believe that since we've had somebody on the panel for the past couple of years. So I'm going to structure how we talk about what we talk about today within the strategies that we have in place. So part of the good thing that happened when the pandemic hit was that we had strategies in place to help guide our decision-making around funding. And those strategies were developed with people with lived experience. So I have these up, but I'll go into kind of deeper detail for each of these. But essentially, we want to make sure that if people that we are meeting people's needs up front, that if people do need shelter, we get them there quickly, that we're able to urgently move people into all available housing, and that we're helping people get there, that we're not just setting out expectations, that we're actually funding trained professionals to help guide individuals through these complicated processes and into housing. So here's when we say homeless response system, especially in Hennepin County, these are the different components we're talking about. And I'll kind of go into details, but the Hennepin Shelter Hotline is a diversion program that was launched a little over a year ago. And it's really having creative conversations with people. If they're saying, I need shelter, we're saying, okay, but what is your crisis right now? Do you think we can maybe help you stay with that friend that you really like, but you need to pay a couple of extra dollars to stay there that would keep you out of shelter? Then you can move into housing next week. Let's do that. So having conversations to help capitalize on people's more informal networks to still connect them to housing. And for folks that do need shelter, quickly connecting them to our emergency shelter system, which we've invested in heavily to be better, more responsive, more service rich. Daytime drop-in centers are critical to be really service rich and connect people when we can. And of course, our emergency shelter systems and our street outreach teams. And all of that leads to housing, which is like this big, like future looking piece in the distance. So this is the first strategy, help people access community-based resources as an alternative to shelter. So the Hennepin Shelter Hotline launched on January 2nd, 2023. And that was the program I was just describing. We contract with Catholic Charities. So they're a very trusted nonprofit provider. And before we were diverting nobody. And since launching this program, 30 to 40 households are getting diverted each week. So these are people that will never need to experience the trauma of shelter, and we're able to get connected to services. The other piece that's important here is that as we're able to keep people out of shelter, we have more room for people in shelter, which is really important as well. So the other piece that Hennepin Shelter Hotline did was it broke down silos. We had these silos in our system of like, if you're a youth, if you're a singles, if you're a family. And nobody identifies that way. So what Hennepin Shelter Hotline did was it gave one number for people to call, one kind of front door to our homeless response system that is easy to navigate, easy to understand, and we're able to connect people to all the different services directly from that one number. And could somebody help me with the messages in the chat, because I'm sharing my screen and I can't see much here if they come through. All right. So if somebody does experience need shelter, we need to quickly get them into emergency shelter and make sure that it's low barrier. What low barrier means is that there's not a lot of preconditions. We're not making people jump through hoops or meet expectations. If you need shelter, you get shelter, and it should be safe and dignified shelter. So I'm going to sit on this slide for a while because there's been quite a few investments in our emergency shelter system. And again, this was driven by people with lived experience saying we need better, we deserve better. We fully agreed, and we followed their guidance of how to kind of put those resources online. So in terms of improving shelter environments, we were able to add some shelters that didn't exist. So the women's only shelter, female identified single adults were like, there's no shelter that's not co-located with men. Some of us need a different amount of safety or peace or space in order to really focus on housing. So we were able to open a 30-bed small scale women's only shelter managed by Salvation Army in a beautiful building through pandemic investments. Hope Street, which is a youth shelter, got a brand new beautiful building. They were in a borrowed space before. So this was a very important move. And there's been housing outcomes kind of just showing that people were able to settle in and be more housing focused since moving in. And we were able to renovate most of other shelter spaces. I don't know if anybody have been to the Harbor Light Center, but that was a overly used older building. And so it was deconcentrated during the pandemic. There used to be, when I first started back in 2015, there was like 800 people staying there. Then it went down to 500. And then in the pandemic, we deconcentrated it down to 250 people. And we renovated the entire first, second, and third floors with HVAC, touch bathrooms, things that people deserved forever, but we were able to actually bring it online through this increased funding. Reduced financial burden for use of shelters. We were able to eliminate shelter costs that people had to cover before. So self-pay was eliminated in the single system and in the family system. Sorry, is there a question? Okay.
Danielle, could everybody please mute your...
with 39 saves.
Please mute. Danielle, I just wanted to say, do you want questions while you're giving the presentation or after?
Sure, we can take them while we're doing it. It'll be more topical.
Well, the question that's on the screen right now is from Commissioner Greene from Margaret Berg, and she'd like to ask the commissioner about the 3 proposed ordinances that the city council is considering regarding encampments. How do these ideas mesh with the county programs? Are they trying to work with the county, or are these ideas antagonistic? So, do you want to take that question or you want to take it to the end?
I'd be happy to take that now to engender, as Danielle said, a spirit of conversation in our gathering. So the city of Minneapolis has proposed, and I can find specificity around 2 of the 3, but not the third. So I'm not totally sure, or if others know the third specific one, I'd appreciate the help. But there are 2 things that that I understand the city has proposed. One of them is they would like to, the council members would like, or I should say, the proposing council members would like to make sure that folks who are living in an encampment have a minimum notice before they're evicted. So the city would provide notice to folks in the encampment before the eviction occurs. And the second one is around allowing, the city would allow around the clock temporary spaces, around the clock temporary housing that people build themselves, which has happened in other cities. And I'm very interested in Danielle's professional opinion. We haven't talked about these specifically, so this is Civic Buzz real time. My take on those 2 things is that, first of all, I believe that the city does provide notice, because what they try to do before going in and disrupting an encampment is really working with the county to urge people of their own choice to go to shelter, engage with services, etc. And so in that way, people have the heads up that government is aware, government wants to provide the services that you need and wants to engage with you. On the second count of allowing, essentially, I'm interpreting it as allowing encampments. At a certain point, there's some sweet spot, and sort of it's hard to really pick what that sweet spot is. And I'm sorry, I'm saying sweet spot probably inappropriately. There's some threshold, a sort of turning point, a size number of encampment where past that point, it does not make sense to have an encampment because it's going to cause more health problems than it will solve. So while I want to acknowledge the importance of stability and the desire to allow housing where somebody believes that they will be most comfortable, and maybe what they're saying is they won't be most comfortable in the shelter that we are offering, there's a size at which an encampment becomes a danger to both the residents of the encampment and other folks who might be sort of coming in and out of the encampment. And so at that point, I think that government needs to acknowledge that an encampment is not sort of the right solution and needs to dissolve the housing, dissolve whatever's happening. I want to also acknowledge that I talk about this somewhat uncomfortably because I do think Hennepin County does a really great job. And when I say Hennepin County, I mean specifically the street outreach teams of working with people to make sure that encampments don't become a certain size. For some reason, the city has struggled a little bit more, and I don't know what's sort of the missing piece there that's not happening at the city that is happening at the county. And the reason that there's a distinction is because the county has overview or purview over some public spaces, but not others. But for whatever reason, the formula that this county is using has been more successful, I think, than the formula that the city is using. And so I think that these council members' proposal to allow encampments of a certain size is not a good choice, and that instead some other policy changes would need to be made. So I'll end it there because there's lots more to cover, and I'd love some back and forth on the topic. Danielle, please feel free to chime in on this question as well and confirm or deny some of the things I've said. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Greene. Yeah, and I will get to some slides, and we were able to launch a street outreach team called Streets to Housing just 2 years ago. And everything Commissioner Greene said, absolutely. What our team really does focus on is service delivery. That's our purpose. That's what we do. We provide services. And so that's our role in all of this. So the thing to know around people that experience an unsheltered homelessness and people that may choose to stay in encampments some days and maybe not others is that this is an extremely transient group. People are moving around, getting their needs met for a million different reasons. And having an encampment be cleared is just one reason why people would move. So in order to have a street outreach team that is housing focused and person centered and trauma informed, we have to be able to meet people where they're at, regardless of why they're moving. And so that's what we focus on is service delivery and making sure that we're there for our clients, regardless of where they go. The team is so good at saying that, like, if somebody is outside, that is an ask for help. This whole people outside don't want housing, that has not been our experience. 100% of the people that's been engaged has been like, may not have what I want right now. I may not trust you right now. I may not be in a state where I can talk to you right now, but I do want housing, and let's work on that. And so it's really about progressive engagement and being able to take that tent outside as an ask for assistance and say all right, let's do this. You need benefits, you need basic needs, you need access to housing. And so we lead in that way. And that's how we approach folks who are staying outside. I have some data that I can share as well about those engagements. Are there more questions, or should I try to jump back into the PowerPoint? Should we keep on questions? What are people feeling?
Just one quick question that I'll address, which was somebody asked, what is that threshold that I named? What's the number? And of course, like all great questions, the answer is it depends. From my experience, and I've gotten a lot more experience in this issue, honestly, starting with the pandemic when there were many more encampments in the city of Minneapolis, and I was chair of the board. And the conversation has just been ongoing. I would say a single digit number, somewhere between 2 and 9. But it sort of depends on some other factors like location and other details of that particular encampment. But as Danielle said, like really, any encampment is not positive, because when people are living outside, there's not somebody who's saying, I'd like to live outside. I'd rather not live inside. Thank you.
Okay, I was able to share so easily the first time. Let's see if I'm able to make it work again. Ooh, all right. Can everyone see?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so we're back in emergency shelter land. So I'll just quickly go through this. We were able to put a Vivo Village and AICDC Homeward Bound online. These are brand new shelters that really, they were much needed. People were telling us that they needed different options to meet their needs. A Vivo Village really focuses on people moving directly out of encampments that are addicted to opioids and need specific substance use disorder support. And low barrier. You can have your pets with you. You're kind of in your own space. AACDC Homeward Bound is our first culturally specific shelter, Indigenous run for Indigenous individuals. It's well utilized. It's full every single night with amazing housing outcomes, and people who were not willing to come inside are willing to come inside to that shelter because they feel comfortable and seen and served. Family shelter overflow, we were able to increase capacity. I'll mention that in just a bit as well, a lot more detail around that. And then we were also able to increase shelter space during winter, putting daytime services as well as additional shelter bed to meet the need. The other piece we were able to fund with pandemic fundings is we went from 25% of our shelter beds being 24/7 in the single system to 75%. So kind of a flip. And the 25% that aren't 24/7 are really, they keep that churn, because some people just need it for a night, and we need beds available every single day for people that are coming in. So it allows kind of different people's needs to be served in different ways. Sometimes we get asked around the cost of emergency shelters. So I add this slide just so that people can see the increase in cost per bed since we invested and said, like, this was our strategy. People deserve better. We were going to have a service-rich sheltered system. And so Harbor Light Center 24-hour bed, which was the only 24-hour bed in the system before the pandemic, was about $15,000 per bed per year. And we have AICDC coming in at $36,000. So that's 24/7. That's with case management. That's with 3 meals a day. And so just better care, better services. All right. So family shelter, and of course, Commissioner Greene, feel free to jump in here. But family shelter is a key part of our homeless response system. There is a commitment in Hennepin County that no child will sleep outside. And so due to this, the county grew capacity in order to meet demand. During the pandemic, we were at the lowest family shelter numbers in some of our history. We were only in one shelter with a contracted provider. And a large part of this was the eviction moratorium during the pandemic. So the shelter team, the county is approaching the shelter in a different way, and we moved it in a different area and launching housing focused case management, and really just meeting families where they're at, and really focusing on finding housing and being those people helping people where to go. We always say you need places for people to go and people to help them get there. And so in creating this case management team is really important to create the outflow and make sure that families were moving out of shelter and into housing really consistently. And so we had room for more people, families, to have that service as well. So behind the scenes, a lot of what we're doing is using a by name list. And this is really, it may feel in the weeds, but it's important to say that the way we're doing our work and the way that we're having outcomes right now is because we're taking a person-centered approach. If we have 1,500 people experiencing homelessness in our system on any given night, because those are the amount of shelter beds we have right now, then we need to know who they are. What do they need? What do they want? Where do they want to live? What are their barriers? What are their preferences? Who do they want to live with? And so it's really important to have this by name list and to see the system as a group of individuals that have different needs, preferences, and desires and barriers, and not a stagnant group of people. New people are coming in every day. New people are leaving every day, either to housing or they're just self-resolving and we don't know where they're going. But we need to have a sense of who's in the system and not just see them as numbers. So it's just important to call this out. And we do use the federally mandated homeless management information system as our database. All right, so if the end goal is housing, we want to move people into housing. And like I was saying, we've invested heavily in services, people to help them get into housing. So this is a very long list of housing, navigation and housing focused case management services that never existed before. So we have our homeless to housing team, which is in my area. And when I was started and I said there were 8 people in the area and now there's over 80, it's because this team of wonderful case managers, case aides, and social workers whose entire job is to just house people now exists. So we have the short-term team that focuses on people that have been homeless for less than a year, long-term team that's been focusing on people that have been homeless for longer than a year. We have our homeless access team that is full of higher level specialists focusing on populations such as seniors and veterans. We have a family team and a youth team. We were able to launch an employment enrichment pilot, helping people get employment training and support. We were able to fund case management in shelters. So it's not just this team, but within the actual shelters, we have case managers on site with the goal to try to have a case manager for everybody that wants one. We launched flex funding. That was, if somebody has a housing barrier, you need double deposit, you have an unlawful detainer on your background, you owe a landlord money, and it's the only way that they'll rent to you. We're able to break down those barriers. And also we added the streets to housing team I mentioned. We were able to add coordinated entry assessors to add more access to people. And we were also able to extend access to daytime drop-ins so that 24-hour a day, well, not daytime drop-ins, sorry, drop-in centers at all. So 24 hours a day, people can use drop-in centers to get their needs met, access services, and access their housing-focused case managers. We say case managers a lot. It's a term that's used a lot. So I just use this slide to really show what it means when we say housing focused case management. So they're creating goal plans with their individual clients. They have caseloads. They're connecting people to all of the benefits and resources. They're breaking down barriers. They're driving the person. They're filling out applications. They're securing furniture and basic needs and helping them move in. And then they're also supporting them with wraparound services in housing before discharging to make sure they're stabilized. So our unsheltered response has really been built up over the past couple of years. We kind of moved away from the outreach teams that were being funded to kind of do this kind of life-saving piece and a lot of rapport building, and moved into just radically housing focused and service rich. And so going beyond managing homelessness, trying to get real good time data so that folks just aren't invisible out there, that we know who they are, where they are, what they need, increase collaboration and services, and we were able to work with the city to absorb some of their services funding. So we were able to kind of more robustly manage the whole system and better serve people across it. Very housing focused, always trauma informed, assertively engaging. Like I mentioned, if somebody's outside, we're assuming they need help and we'll show up until if and when they want our help. And we really try to use a broad idea of service delivery. So we're not going to dictate what housing means to somebody, and we'll really follow people's lead. You can see that the impact has been clear. So year on year, we've been housing more people directly from the streets. Before, there was kind of the sense from folks that you had to enter shelter in order to access services. And so it was important for us to not have a prerequisite for services. If you need housing, you should get it. So we're housing more and more people directly from the street, and we still have the same retention rate for those housing outcomes. All right. We also want to maximize efficient and effective use of our homeless designated resources. There's not a ton of funding, I shouldn't say it like that, but the funding that we're used to is funding for homeless dedicated housing. And HUD, Housing and Urban Development, mandates that we use this thing called coordinated entry, which is essentially saying that before it was kind of like who you knew, if that person knew the right housing provider, if your case manager was a go-getter, if you were able to be approved by some of these housing providers, and moved it into less of a who you knew and what you had on your background to more what do you need, what is available, and matching resources to preferences and availability. And so what that means is a lot of assessments, a really thoughtful process to match people. And that's as a team in my area, and we're constantly looking at ways to improve this. We just rolled in background checks and a bunch of other different pieces to try and make better referrals. And just being really transparent with folks about what's available through this. This is not all the housing. This is some housing, and it's for folks that maybe need a higher level of care. And in the past couple of years, we've really focused on trying to, like they're saying, be kinder, gentler, more responsive coordinated entry. So really hearing people with lived experience, having more access points, working better with providers. I have some housing outcomes that I'll share at the end of this for some data as well. We were able to add some funding for coordinated entry, mostly through housing, which I will mention in just a moment. And the emergency housing vouchers were through the federal government through the pandemic. So it's important we look at all housing, not just the housing that's homeless dedicated, because if we're going to do right by people and follow their preferences, we need to look at all of their options. So taking a pause just for a slight second on kind of the system, is that there's this national organization called Community Solutions Built for Zero. And a couple of years ago, they decided they cracked the code on how to end homelessness. Their theory was this by name list. They had a bunch of communities sign on. We signed on in 2017 to end veteran and chronic homelessness. Great. We worked the program. They tapped us last year because they said, based on our data, based on our infrastructure, the support that commissioners give us, all of the things, they believe that Hennepin County is the only community in the country that's poised to actually end long-term homelessness in a big city setting. So we are thrilled by this. And what's come is a really exciting partnership. They've given us over $800,000 just this year for that flex funding I mentioned, as well as some additional positions to keep people in housing and to really focus on our goals to end chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness are folks that have been homeless for 1 year or longer. We're adding up to 12 months cumulatively with a disability. So there was a 28% reduction in chronic homelessness since 2021. We've housed over 1,200 people since 2017 with a 96% retention rate. So these are some of our longest term folks that needed the most support. And we're showing that it's possible to not only house them, but to keep them housed. So housing is the name of the game. In Commissioner Greene's bio, she mentioned the board and the single room occupancies, which is just a really, really exciting new part of our housing continuum, just trying to bring really affordable housing to folks. We were also able to renovate some other housing options and really invest in affordable housing and try to fill gaps in the system. and really focus on ending chronic homelessness as well. So it's just been a really exciting piece that we're not just investing in shelter, but we're investing in the pieces that will help people move into housing as well. All right, so this is my favorite part. This is the data, and then I'll be done talking and can answer all the questions. So our system output. So just to give you a sense, this is looking back into 2023, drop-in centers served over 5,800 unique individuals. These are deduplicated individuals. Hennepin Shelter Hotline, which is our brand new program, right? So a brand new program doesn't always do well, but over 6,700 unique households were served and over 1,300 people diverted. Emergency shelters, over 9,800 unique individuals stayed in shelter in 2023. And you can see the Adult Shelter Connect is single adults, the families, shelters team is the families. And then the coordinated entry system made over 2,300 referrals in 2022 through quarter 3 of 2023. The street outreach teams worked with 2,900 unique individuals in 2022. I think that actually is supposed to be in 2023. It is. That was a typo. I'll correct that before I send you the final slide deck. And last but not least, this is our housing year on year. And you can see that with the investments and influxes of services and resources and focus and best practices and strategies, you can see that we're increasing our total exits housing outcomes year on year. And in 2023, we ended with an 18% increase from the year before. And we just want to keep it up and keep it going. And with our homeless to housing team, we are sitting at 96% retention rate. So 96% of the people that were housed in 2023 are still in housing. All right. That was a lot, but that's all I got. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, hi, Courtney, thank you. We have a question from Courtney Kiernot. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please talk about community, as this is a barrier to people being willing to accept housing. Being alone, away from community, is a challenge to success.
Yes, I missed the very beginning part of that question. Would you mind just repeating the very beginning part? I apologize.
Please talk about community. This is a barrier to people being willing to accept housing.
Yeah, so like I said, it's not that people aren't saying they don't want housing, is that we may not have exactly what they need at that moment. So part of it is helping with community and making sure that people are connected. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're having case aids when people are moving in, help people kind of connect to their informal community. Is there a church nearby you want to check out? Is there a food shelf you want to check out? Can we help you knock on a neighbor door and introduce yourself? So there's that piece of like trying to help people really get connected into the neighborhood that they're moving into. But it's also just saying it's okay to come back and hang out with your community, but the housing and how you maintain your housing and how you treat that space that's yours and how we can empower people to have that as a positive thing, bring community to you, go out and get community. And it is a skill set. And a lot of it is having these wraparound services when people are moving into housing. You know, we can go out and house the next person and make sure that that person has the right stabilization services, whether that's a caddy waiver, an elderly waiver, arms worker, case manager with their housing program, somebody to really help them do that journey of finding their community, finding stabilization, feeling comfortable in their own home. And we also have these move-in kits, as we know that like people need to feel comfortable in their house. Oftentimes people need a radio or a TV to keep them company. So it's like little things like this that we think is helpful to really help people stabilize. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. The other part of that is, please explain coordinated entry, both benefits and challenges for people unhoused.
So one of the the biggest challenge to coordinate entry is that demand is always going to exceed supply. So we have very clear data on our website and through our newsletters that shows how many housing openings we have each month and how many people are on a priority list. So what's important is that and these are very highly funded supportive services, right? So some of these are site-based with a front desk and like on-site case management. So it's important to match that resource and level of services to the person that wants it, needs it, and will thrive. So part of coordinated entry, the trick is to make sure that we are putting people in the right places, and that we are stressing that this is not it. This is not the only way to get housing. It can't be, because the numbers don't add up. So that's why we need to look at all of the options. Board and lodge, roommate situations. We need to increase your income, all of the different options. And so the homeless dedicated housing process and housing stock is an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole piece of the puzzle. So that's one of the pieces. The other thing is that we're constantly trying to strengthen it. So like I said, we are just implementing these changes now because we needed to hire more staff and all of these pieces, but we're going to check backgrounds now. So we're making referrals for programs, and, it was self-report background, but now we're going to say, we know that this is a good referral. We did a lot of extra steps. And so we hope that it'll increase efficiency to match people more quickly and have less kind of turnaround. Right now it's a 50% success rate, and the team is really working towards a 75% success rate at the very least.
Can you speak about can you just speak about it related to youth? Because youth have to be homeless before they can enter coordinated entry, correct? So
coordinated
impact.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you go. I shouldn't have unmuted. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I understand what you're asking. Yes. So coordinated entry is specifically for people who are experiencing literal homelessness in our community. And it's not that other folks that aren't experiencing literal homelessness don't absolutely need housing. It's that we do not have enough of this housing stock. And so we are prioritizing it for the people that are in the most dire straits, have the fewest options, have the fewest access points, may actually be sleeping outside. So that is who is assessed for coordinated entry. So we never, ever want anyone to make their situation worse to quote unquote qualify for coordinated entry. Because what you're really saying is that you're going to go into literal homelessness to then get on a priority list, to then get referred to a housing. No, let's try it. What is your need right now? If you're housing insecure, if you need shelter, let's call the Hennepin Shelter Hotline. Maybe we can get you served through there. We have a robust youth service network through youth drop-ins and youth shelters. And so it's really about what resource is going to serve that youth the best and serve them to either prevent homelessness or get them out of homelessness. Coordinated entry is not going to be the answer for everybody, and it can't be. We don't have enough.
Okay, Jane Papa Giorgio, I assume, wants to know, she says that she notices that our reading guide that about 5,000 folks were evicted by September of last year, I'm assuming. What are the reasons for evictions? Is it payment of rent or other reasons, or pandemic resources? I added that part.
So I should have said when I started that in our area, it's rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's what our goal is. So we're trying to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. Often homelessness is also called the brief area, because if somebody does experience homelessness, we're trying to make it as brief as possible. So my colleagues in the rare area really focus around prevention. And so they're doing a lot of rental assistance. They support the Stable Home, Stable Schools program. And it's really trying to keep families in housing. A lot of it is income and financial reasons. That is the primary reason why families are evicted. A huge intervention since the pandemic has been that we created a universal coverage for people that were in eviction court to have legal services, and also place case management at housing court. So really trying to bridge that gap. Before, very, very few people had legal representation. And if you didn't have legal representation, you were much more likely to be evicted. So that was one of the key interventions that we put in place that has just been so obviously impactful. The amount of evictions have increased, but the amount of successful evictions have decreased.
Okay. Ellen wants to know how much money is 50% of AMI? That's Ellen Hughes, or 30% of AMI?
I would need to find the exact amount, and it's calculated differently based on a bunch of different pieces locally. So I can get the numbers for our area if that's helpful afterwards.
Are there studies about whether, I'm sorry, was someone trying to speak?
Sorry, it's Commissioner Greene. I was just going to chime in and double down a little bit on some of the things that Danielle has said, specifically that as she's described, there's been enormous investment in this space, enormous innovation, and success, resulting success. But none of this is happening in a vacuum, and the need for other factors to change to really end homelessness is urgent. And specifically, something that she named that I'd like to call out is wages and income, and the fact that people, the minimum wage needs to be higher. Minnesota, I'm really glad, is different from many states in its focus on this issue. But it's something that sort of has to be figured out, both the minimum wage and just, in general, the cost between sort of the haves and the haves not, and that growing gap. So I wanted to really emphasize that. I also, as I'm hearing Danielle talk, and I noticed there was a question about this, and Danielle, please correct me on this if I'm wrong, but somebody asked about sort of parallel systems between the city and the county, and the sort of degree of overlap. And let's see, how do I say this? What's different in the city of Minneapolis, or any given city, is how the city responds to somebody experiencing homelessness, comma. However, the street outreach is really the work of the county, and that street outreach is happening all over Hennepin County and in the city of Minneapolis, but also in our other cities. And nobody is saying to anybody who's unhoused, well, are you being helped by city people? If so, we'll move along and talk to folks who are whom we should focus on. The county and the county's outreach teams are reaching out to everybody, building that trust and rapport with everybody. The part that is where there ends up being sort of a difference, and sometimes I've been in situations where people are saying like, well, Marion social services are your job as the county, and that is exactly right. Where we end up with a little bit of like who's on first with the city is that very initial response, and whether or not an encampment honestly is going to be permitted. And so that's the distinction that I want to draw. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah Gendra wants to know, are there studies about whether guaranteed income experiments are cost effective in addressing homelessness? And she also commented that the cost per bed seemed really high.
Again, I would love to hear Danielle's response to this question. My response is that yes, there are studies. It's a sort of growing body of work. And let me maybe back up by defining that guaranteed basic income, or GBI, is the idea that instead of government sort of prescribing what somebody needs, the family or individual is given something that's more equivalent to cash, so that they can prioritize how that money meets the needs of their life or their family. And it's both done on a sort of emergency response basis, but then also maybe somebody is in stable housing, but living extremely close to the edge and is vulnerable to falling out of stable housing. So cash in a situation like that. And in what studies are showing is that the less sort of strictures that you can provide is better for the people that we're serving. Like there is in American culture a desire to sort of have somebody prove that they need what they say they need before it's provided by government. And something that I think GBI really addresses is people know best with their own experiences and what they need in order to stabilize and make their lives what they need them to be. That both the city and the county are engaged right now in guaranteed basic income studies. And in fact, there's some preliminary results, I think, from the city's study that were recently published by the oh gosh, it's that federal organization and their offices are down by the river. But in any event, there's some preliminary data showing the efficacy of the pilot that the city has engaged with. And it's something that's popping up all over the United States. I'm actually part of a coalition of city and county officials in support of guaranteed basic income, because that's really, it's funny that I just was talking about the need for a higher minimum wage, and that incomes really need to change before we're going to end homelessness, because this really is addressing that. This is about income, and it comes generally without strings attached. And I'll say that in some cases the pilots are also actually, why don't I cut it off there? We've got other questions. I feel like I could go on. Please, thank you.
So we'll move on to Jane Lansing's question about how do we decrease the inflow of homelessness? And I would like to add, is there high rates of recidivism in this?
So just really quickly around the bed price, that was the end part of that other question. Yeah, Avivo is a very expensive model, which is when people are like, let's just do more Avivo. It's a very expensive model. We have a continuum of services in our shelter because we know that people need different things at different times. Avivo Village is really focused on treatment and services for folks that are addicted to opioids and other drugs. And so it's important to have around the clock more service, more staffing than normal. People are giving out Narcan. There's more kind of case management support, smaller caseload. So it's kind of the Cadillac model. And then, and so, yes, it is expensive to provide that level of services. And so that is part of the part, and that's why we do want to share those prices and those price tags really transparently. Regarding the question around inflow, so our director, David Hewitt, really has championed this structure of rare, brief, and non-recurring, right? So we want to prevent homelessness whenever we can. We want to, if somebody does become homeless, we want to resolve it as quickly as we can, and we want to keep them as in housing as long as we can. And so reducing inflow is a lot about what Commissioner Greene was just talking about, and around a lot of those prevention resources. How can we have our tenant resource center meet people's needs way up front so that they are never in the point of about to lose their home? How can we funnel money to them exactly at the point when they need it, and not have it get too far where they owe a lot more and it's going to be a lot more complicated to keep them in? So that's it. Inflow is really about preventing people from becoming homelessness, because it's a cheaper and more effective intervention to keep people where they are, rather than having them come into homelessness, shelter them, and move them into housing, which is expensive. And so that's one of the pieces. And there was another piece, and I can't find this question in the chat for some reason. So somebody may need to feed me the beginning part of the chat.
Was that the same question? How do we decrease inflow? Aren't new people falling into homelessness every year? Are there programs to get ahead of this to help people avoid ever facing this trauma again?
Yes. So all of these prevention programs. So we haven't gone into detail, and that may be a good group to come speak at another Civic Buzz, is there's a whole kind of world out there around prevention. But stable homes, stable schools is a really effective intervention that was championed locally around meeting families where they're at, and using those kind of natural resources of schools to help address housing insecurity. The tenant resource center is moving upstream, trying to connect a lot of tenant resources to people when they need it without having to call a billion different numbers. And the prevention of funding and rental assistance is huge. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of dollars getting sent to people. I believe that $8,000 is like the average amount being offered. So it's not a small amount for folks that people are needing to stay in housing. And again, these resources did not really exist before the pandemic. Prevention resources were not as robust. So a lot of what was achieved at the state legislature this last session was around prevention and around making sure that people are able to stay in their homes, and that we're able to meet people as far upstream as possible. So that's really around how to decrease that inflow.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Danielle. Something I was going to layer on to that. I talked in my opening remarks about how uplifting and really hearing the voices of those experienced is becoming increasingly a signature part of the county's work. And the other piece is this issue of prevention, again, in all sorts of spaces, but really trying to go upstream and talk about sort of the root causes and also coordinate across departments so that when we're meeting a person or a family in an emergency situation in one part of the county's work, how can we coordinate better and sort of prevent that emergency situation by collaborating across departments and reaching that person earlier on in their sort of path towards whatever that emergency moment is. I also wanted to acknowledge, so I'm so glad we got a question from Courtney Cushing-Kiernat. She's no longer at the Pollad Foundation, but she was a couple years ago, and they and she have been crucial partners in this space. And if, you know, she may correct my history, but I think that she was an important part of the team when the Tenant Resources Center was started. And part of what the Pollad Foundation and Courtney and the county team were getting at was how can we create a centralized place to provide those resources and learn real time from the cases that are coming through and again, be able to respond more quickly and effectively. So I want to thank her for that work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Another question from Polly Keppel. She wants to know if there's any duplication of service providers within the city of Minneapolis. Maybe Danielle or
City and county.
Duplication of service providers. I'm not sure I understand that question. I apologize.
I think
Right.
this is
Polly-
about is the city also trying to sort of stand up a system in the same way that the county is?
Got it. No, not to my knowledge. We work really close. We meet with the city. Me and my team meet with the city often to coordinate the pieces that do overlap. We really do own the service delivery piece. And so, like I mentioned briefly, we even kind of took funding that was funding services, but they were like, yeah, it should be part of a system. It should be coordinated. The same performance measure should be across the board. Like, it should make sense. So we were able to take on some of those pieces. And so we really do the service delivery piece. And then the city is a property manager, and as Commissioner Greene is mentioning, there's a lot of different property owners around the county, and that really determines a lot of that response. So there's between the property owners, the service delivery, it's the homeless response system as a whole, and so that's the really piece that we lean into.
I will say that when I read the preliminary result of the guaranteed basic income study that the city is doing, I thought to myself, where is this headed? Are they going to get great results? And then of course, pivot to the county and say, you guys need to do more guaranteed basic income, which, you know, I honestly thought is within the realm of the possible, but I will find perfectly acceptable because we're doing some of that research too.
Lisa, we are over. It's
That is
8:09.
true.
You want to continue or?
I'm not seeing more questions in the chat, although there was one person who was talking about well, two different people. One saying that Avivo, mentioning that they're chronically underfunded, but then also talking about burnout and how the specialty staff it's intense work, and is there anything being done to facilitate or to ameliorate that? And also, is that true in other facilities as well?
Yeah, I can just really briefly talk on that. Yeah, doing service delivery in our emergency homeless response system is tough. And so part of what we've focused on in the past couple of years is making sure, especially as we grew our own internal service delivery team, that they were well supported and well taken care of. So the burnout is real. We do invest in training for all of the different shelter providers. That was one of the Street Voices of Change top recommendations, is that everybody needs better training, because it's you're taking care of yourself while you're taking care of other people. So the county is really happy that we can provide that kind of training for direct service workers in our homeless response system. And, internally, we try to provide as much support as we can. We pushed out some employee support funding to our providers during the pandemic, being like, yeah, this is really hard and they're doing really hard work. So we do what we can where we can. But the other thing is that people are in this work because they love it and think that people experiencing homelessness are the most resilient, amazing people in the world. And so there's a sense of purpose as well. So, we always do what we can, and we try to support our providers in that as well. And I can get more into funding. I will say that Avivo is our best funded shelter with public funding in our system, and that the local funding is one of the only ways to fund emergency housing or emergency shelter. Apologies, HUD does not fund it. And so we're trying to fund a lot with a little, and making sure that we're being really thoughtful in how we fund different programs and have a full continuum of services.
I'll acknowledge also that Avivo, and maybe this was mentioned, but Avivo is a very low barrier shelter, and its model, while effective, is really complex and a pretty intensive model. And that's one of the things that makes it, maybe, this is me hypothesizing, theorizing, but I bet it's sort of more expensive per capita. That's not to say that we don't need it. As Danielle just said, it's this continuum that we need to provide. We need to provide a really diverse number of options so that we have the thing that's sort of the right mix, the right model to meet somebody where they're at. But I think that's one of the reasons why Avivo has wrestled with sort of chronic underfunding, is that it's more funded than others, and we just have to sort of figure out where to find more money. And that goes for Avivo, but that goes for the whole system. I don't want to sort of hang that on them. They're an important part of this very diverse sort of portfolio of responses.
So real quick, one other question. It says here, how is the money distributed to the buildings and the program providers? How does that go out to them?
So there's requests for proposals. We just finished our youth homeless and housing services request for proposals. There was a request for proposals to choose our diversion provider, our women's only provider. So basically everything our winter services, everything we do through thoughtful requests for proposals, and people's lived experience are on those review panels and making those final funding decisions. And we really tried to make sure that we're filling gaps and being really data informed. So we're not just looking to kind of continue to fund things that already exist and not bring new pieces online. So it's a thoughtful process. And we hope to put potentially a new RFP out for this sort of funding in 2026, potentially. Maybe.
Okay, our time is past. Thank you so much, both of you, for a really interesting presentation, and also for taking so many questions and going over time. I know there's so much more that we could talk about the issue, but I guess that's all we have time for. I want to let everyone know, first of all, there will be a recording of tonight's program, and we'll put that on the Civic Buzz website, so you can find it there if you want to look at it again, or refer other people, other members, and anyone in the public that you know of. Danielle has said that she will give us the final slide deck, and or maybe as a PDF that's easier to access, and we can put that there too. One more thing, just a little business, is that Janet Mitbo has a little request of all of our members. Janet?
Okay, well, most of you know probably why I'm here, and that is that the league has a small little project on election night that's called Election Returns, where we serve the city of Minneapolis by collecting, sorting, checking in all the things that have to come in. The precinct judges have to bring in after the elections close, and it takes about 70 to 80 people to do this. The city loves it. They love us, but we need 70 to 80 volunteers. And at the moment, we're about 15 short. So I know some of you have already told me you're going to be part of it. And some of you have been part of it for a long time. Some of you are not available, and I know that. But if you haven't done this, there'll be something in the update about it. And you can contact me. You can contact, I believe, Michelle in the office. Is that correct, Michelle? Yeah, see, she's shaking her head. And you can contact Rosemary Lawrence. And we would just love to have you be part of it. And it's a fun thing. There's a whole bunch of us working together, and we're doing something great for the city and raising money for the league. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Janet, and thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Hennepin County.
Great.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to our organizers. And thank you, Lisa, for our serendipitous meeting a couple months ago.
That was great. Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.